Okay, welcome everyone to the Test 1 review. Now, it looks like some of us had some difficulty with Test 1. So, fortunately, we're not able to meet all together. So, this is going to be our review for what you need to do because the subsequent tests are going to be much harder. So, you need to get everything fixed from the last one. Now, before you say anything, let me just point out that this is the same exact test that we have used for this unit for the past 4 years. And this course has always been online, so nothing is any different. So COVID has nothing to do with it. So the grades this time were significantly lower than in past years, which means we have some things we need to rectify. So just bear that in mind. Now, as we said, this whole course is cumulative, so if there are things you don't quite understand and patterns you haven't quite learned at this point, that is only going to snowball, and by the time you get to measure 10, it will be really bad. So, let's move on, okay? This, of course, was the first page of the test. You will recognize it. Most of these were pretty straightforward and pretty easy, but some basic things here we beat to death. Follow the instructions. We said this over and over, right? And even here, we have it in capital letters, and it says read that again and make sure you do it. And still, some of us did not. Some of you, I'm sure, knew exactly what the root of this word was here for number 4. You just didn't write it this way. So, I mean, if you're not reading this after we have beat so hard about follow the instructions, kind of makes you wonder. It's not that you don't understand. You're just not going about it carefully. Okay, anyway, with that said, okay, beyond the obvious that, dude, you just have to do what it says here. Okay. Okay, so let's move on to the ones that were the most tricky for people. By far, the trickiest item on page 1 was number 7, Ra'eb. Okay, now I can see why that's a bit difficult, even because we have emphasized Hamza roots, and we told everyone to review the Hamza root video. So you say, oh, there's a Hamza in there, and so you went about and wrote this as Ghain Hamza Ba. Except, remember, going back to measure 1, active participle, this is the form for a active participle with a long vowel in the root. We had several of these to practice. You had a whole exercise on practicing these. If this is the root here, okay, remember what happens when you try to do an active participle. You can't add another aleph when there's already one there, so we end up with this. So again, this is just one of the patterns you have to recognize. There's a couple of oddball patterns like the maf'ul up here that you just have to recognize that that's what it is. Okay, this was not put in there to trick you. You are going to encounter these in real life. This is a fairly common pattern that you're going to see. There's a lot of common words that come from this. And again, if you think that is the root, you go look it up. You're not going to find, if you go looking up Ra, Hamza, Ba, you're not going to find it in Hansver. You're not going to be able to find that word. So this is just, get used to it. Expect to see some of these on everything, on any tests. I mean, it's not a trick if we're telling you this right out. Just expect to see that. Okay, so that one. Go back. If you have any issues, go back, review measure 1 active participles and what happens for the ones with the long vowels. So you know that. Okay, it's just one of the tricky ones. Okay, so that was the first issue that was shwaya tricky. Okay, what's next? The next one that caught a fair number of people, though nowhere near as many as Ghaib, was number 14, Udar. Now this one should not be a trick at all, but for some of us this was a big issue throughout the entire test, was you just didn't recognize when something was a conjugated verb. I mean, this should not be tricky to recognize that the ya on the front of this word means it's conjugated for huwa. He does. I mean, that's not a trick at all. And I think if you're going to read anything that's written, authentic material, there's going to be all kinds of conjugated verbs. Look, we only have one type of verb conjugation. Okay, again, you learned these back in 101. If you're still not sure, this is just another reason why you have to learn. It's going to beat you over the head time and time again. So why would you learn the word for hadika and not learn the conjugation? Okay, so that was a big one. So many of us put ya as the first letter. Ya, dad, ra. That shouldn't even be a possibility here. I mean, obviously, this is a verb. Okay, so we look at it. The ya should come off. Okay, now you have here a dad. Okay, that is pretty straightforward. You know that's going to be the first letter. Okay, let's bring that up. And then you have a ra with a shadda. That means there's two ras. And again, we had an exercise on doubled roots like this, so it's not a trick. Okay, so that is the root for this one. What have we learned that has a shadda on the last letter? Nothing. There's no pattern we learned that has that. So you know that's not some kind of pattern. That means the root is this. And there are quite a few roots that have these two last letters the same. So if you looked it up under this, then you found it. Okay, so that's the three-letter root for that one. Okay. Okay, let's continue on to page 2, which page 2 was pretty good for most everyone. Not many issues here, but I'd just like to point out, look here at number 8, Za'ir. Okay, Za'ir. Most everybody got that was an AP. Okay. Most everybody got that. Now that is the exact same pattern as number 8 here, and we even made them the same number. And I mean, this was a test you could go back and forth on. Okay, so it's the exact same as Ghaib, which is the same number here. Okay, so we pointed out to you, many of you recognize this pattern right here, but didn't recognize the same pattern here. And it's all in the same test. You can go back and forth and check these. Okay, so that was a bit odd. Okay, and number 11 here. Again, a question of recognizing conjugations. I mean, if you don't have those at this point, you really need to. Okay, so yanam, you should recognize. I mean, first of all, that word is one that's familiar to us, but yanam, you should realize that the ya is a conjugation, and the root of this word is that. Now, if you put that as the root, okay, that doesn't match any pattern we've seen, and then, I mean, that's just sort of a guess. Okay, the other issue on these, other issue for some of us, this was not a big problem, but just to point it out, if there were other mistakes on this page, they tended to be confusing words like this one, mu'allim, and a word like mulawith. Now you have them right there to compare. So these words, these are the exact same patterns, except one of them has a kasra underneath and one of them has a feta on top. So you know they're not the same pattern. This one, of course, is an AP of measure 2, and this one is a passive participle of measure 2. Now it looks like just a tiny difference. The difference of this one short vowel here. And again, we said to associate this short vowel kasra in this position with the AP and the feta in this position with passive participle. The reason we say this is because this is true for every single measure except for measure 1, which you know the measure 1 active and passive participles look nothing like this. Measure 1 is an oddball. 2 through 10 all have that same rule, that the active participle and the passive participle are going to look identical except for this. So you'd not only be getting it wrong for this measure, you would be getting it wrong for every measure that you will see for the rest of the course and for the rest of your life. So you just have to remember that kasra, okay, is active participle. You know, think of this. It takes action to move it down there. Okay, whatever. Other than that, the others were just sort of whether you recognize the patterns or not. Okay, so at this point, through pages 1 and 2, we're not doing so bad. Okay, then we come to the infamous matrix here. I have no idea what was going on this one. Now, some of you got 100% on this, but others, the directions just, I think, confuse you to the point of you just had things in there that were sort of random, and we can't really tell if you knew the measures and the patterns or not. Okay, so and this is where most of you lost all of your points, and for a lot of them it was just really not possible to grade them because we couldn't tell what you were trying to do here. So with that in mind, we're going to have everyone redo this part, just the matrix, okay, so it doesn't bring your grade way down. Now, for those of you who got 100% on it, or some of you lost 1 point or something, you don't have to redo it, obviously. But for those who just got completely confused about what the intent was, we're going to redo this. All right, so again, pay attention to the instructions here, because next time if you do something different, it's not going to count. It's going to be exactly like this, the exact same format. So it says you're supposed to fill in the column and row headings. So the first thing here is that we said measure 1 and 2 are both used twice. Now, you know, we have a 1 here in this box, okay, which obviously it's not in Arabic, it's a Roman numeral 1. So obviously that means measure 1. What else would that be doing here besides that? So that's obviously what this is. So if this is 1, what we were expecting is that you would recognize that, oh, this here, that ta'lim, this is one of the patterns we say to always recognize because it's very distinct. This is obviously a measure 2 masdar. This is 2. This one has a shadda over the middle letter, so we know that is a measure. You only got measure 1 and measure 2. That is not a measure 1 verb, that is a measure 2. You put a 2, and then this one, mafrush, you should recognize this is that maktub pattern. Again, one of the most distinctive patterns you're going to see. That's a measure 1 passive participle, but you've already got 2 on there twice, so that has to be 1. Okay, so that was the intent. That's what you were supposed to end up with in this column, just like on the homework exercises that you had that were the exact same thing. Unfortunately, we had all kinds of stuff in here. A lot of you just removed the 1 completely, which was already there, and you put in the root or you put in something else. And once you did that, the rest of this was all completely in disarray. So that's there. Do not take it away. So if these are the measures down the side, and this says place noun, so obviously what goes across the top are the type of words. Okay, so that's obviously a verb. So this is the verb. Okay, you know this is an active participle form. This one is a passive participle form, and this is a very familiar measure 2 masdar, and then we just filled in the rest. Okay, And as we say here, varies is an acceptable answer. It's not only an acceptable answer, it's the answer you have to give because measure 1 is not consistent. So that's a measure 1. Da, 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 da. This is the same pattern again. Right, tadris and so on. Okay, so that's the way it is. A lot of you put the roots down here, and then you put like measure 1 passive participle here, or measure 1 here, but the one we gave you, place noun, it doesn't say 1 or 2. Anyway, that's all water under the bridge. We shall not waste any more time about the instructions on that, but just realize that's the way it's supposed to go. So we're going to redo this part again so everyone gets a fair look at it, and this time you need to follow those instructions. Okay, so that is it for the review. Just make sure you check the instructions for how to redo this and turn that in. And that is it. Shukran jazilan. We're sorry we cannot all meet to ask questions and so forth, but this is the way it is with everything being canceled. All right. Shukran jazilan. Wa ma salama wa kula tawfiq.